Imagine being dragged from your bed in the middle of the night, chains clamping around your wrists before you can even scream, and then being told that in exactly 10 days you'll be strangled, stabbed, and burned alive on a boat with a corpse. Congratulations, you've just volunteered. On the banks of the Volga River in 922, an Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan stood frozen in horror as he watched something that would make even the most seasoned executioner vomit into his own turban. A young enslaved woman, dressed in ceremonial finery that couldn't quite hide the terror in her eyes, was about to undergo what the Vikings called an honor. What Ibn Fadlan called it was considerably less poetic, though his Arabic probably didn't have words adequate enough to describe the systematic brutality he was witnessing. This wasn't just a funeral. This was theater written in blood, performed by men who believed the gods themselves were watching from the cheap seats. The woman standing at the center of this macabre spectacle hadn't started her day planning to die. In fact, she hadn't started any day of her life planning much of anything, because planning requires a future, and enslaved people in the Viking world didn't get those. Her journey to this moment had likely begun months or years earlier, when longships appeared on the horizon of whatever coastal village had the misfortune of being visible from the sea. The Vikings didn't knock politely. They arrived with axes and torches, and they left with whatever wasn't nailed down, including the people. Women were particularly valuable cargo, not because the Vikings were sentimental about female companionship, but because women knew how to weave the massive sails that powered those dragon-headed ships across impossible distances. A good weaver could be worth her weight in silver, assuming anyone bothered to weigh her before throwing her into the ship as whole with dozens of other sobbing captives. The journey north was long enough for hope to die several times over, for the reality to sink in that home was now just a word that meant nothing. By the time these women reached Scandinavia or the trading posts along the Volga, they'd already learned the most important lesson of thraldom. You don't belong to yourself anymore. Your body, your labor, your future, even your death, all of it belongs to whoever has the keys to your chains. But here's where the story takes a turn from merely horrific into the realm of the absolutely demented. When a powerful chieftain died among the Rus Vikings, his enslaved people were gathered together and asked a question that must have sounded like a joke if jokes could kill you. Who wants to die with the boss? And somehow, against all logic and self-preservation, someone always said yes. Ibn Fadlan watched as one young woman stepped forward, volunteering for what can only be described as the worst retirement plan in human history. Now, the Vikings would tell you this was voluntary, that she chose this honor freely, that her decision was respected and celebrated. And technically, sure, she chose it the same way you'd choose to hand over your wallet to a man holding a knife to your throat. It's voluntary in the sense that nobody literally forced the words out of her mouth. But let us be honest about the options available to an enslaved woman in a society where her entire existence depended on the whims of people who considered her less valuable than a good sword. What was she supposed to do? Decline politely and go back to a lifetime of grinding labor, sexual exploitation, and the constant knowledge that she could be killed, sold, or tortured on a Tuesday afternoon because someone was bored? At least this way, for 10 glorious days, she'd be treated like a human being. She'd be given the finest foods, the strongest drinks, new clothes that weren't stained with someone else's blood. She'd walk through the camp with a strange new authority, no longer just property, but something sacred and terrible. A living sacrifice who had transcended the normal rules of slavery by agreeing to die in the most spectacular way imaginable. The preparations began immediately. The dead chieftain was temporarily buried while his people gathered everything needed for a Valita funeral that would make the gods sit up and pay attention. Ships were dragged ashore, not small fishing boats, but proper vessels capable of carrying a man's entire legacy into the afterlife. Carpenters built a small wooden structure on the deck, a death chamber that would serve as the final bedroom for both corpse and sacrifice. Meanwhile, the volunteer spent her last days in what must have felt like a fever dream. She was guarded constantly, not imprisoned exactly, but watched carefully, as though the Vikings worried she might suddenly remember she wanted to live and make a run for it. She participated in ceremonies, sang songs about paradise, and drank enough alcohol to pickle a small army. Ibn Fadlan noted with barely concealed disgust that she seemed almost cheerful, visiting different tents, and declaring that she could see her master waiting for her in the afterlife, beckoning from beyond a doorway suspended in empty air. Whether she actually believed this, or whether it was just the desperate fantasy of a woman trying to find meaning in her own execution, we'll never know. What we do know is that every day brought her closer to the moment when the theater would end and the real horror would begin. The funeral day arrived with all the ceremony of a royal wedding and all the warmth of a slaughterhouse. The chieftain was exhumed from his temporary grave, probably smelling fantastic, after several days in the ground during the Volga summer, and dressed in his absolute finest clothes, because apparently you can take it with you if you're willing to burn it. He was positioned on a ship surrounded by weapons, food, and enough mead to keep a corpse drunk for eternity. Then came the animal sacrifices, executed with a kind of methodical efficiency that suggested these Vikings had done this before and would definitely do it again. A dog was cut in half, its body arranged on the deck like some kind of grotesque decoration. 2 horses followed, then 2 cows, a rooster, and a hen, all dispatched with ritualistic precision and placed around the dead man like he was the world's worst dinner party host. The ship's deck was becoming crowded with corpses, and still the main event hadn't even started. Throughout all of this, the enslaved woman was being prepared for her role in ways that would make your skin crawl right off your bones and run away screaming. She was led from tent to tent in a procession that Ibn Fadlan described with the kind of clinical detail that suggests he was writing everything down specifically so future generations would know exactly how messed up this was. 6 men participated in ritual acts with her, each one invoking the name of the dead chieftain, each one telling her to inform her master that this act was performed purely out of love for him. Love, that's the word they used. Not duty, not obligation, but love, as though affection could be demonstrated through organized violation witnessed by an entire community gathered for a funeral. Outside each tent, the Vikings beat their shields in a rhythmic pounding that shook the air and drowned out whatever sounds might have been coming from inside. Ibn Fadlan noted this detail with bitter clarity. They beat the shields, he wrote, so that the other enslaved people wouldn't hear her cries and become too frightened to volunteer in the future. Think about that for a moment. They were already planning the next sacrifice, already worried about maintaining a steady supply of volunteers for a ritual that required someone to agree to be murdered. The entire production was designed not just to send off one dead chieftain, but to ensure that the system could continue, that there would always be another enslaved woman desperate or deluded enough to step forward when the next powerful man died. Throughout it all, the woman sang. She sang about seeing her master in paradise, about the beautiful afterlife waiting for her beyond the veil. Whether she believed what she was singing, or whether she was just trying to survive the unsurvivable by retreating into fantasy, we'll never know. What we do know is that by the time she was finally led to the ship for the final act, she was so intoxicated that she could barely walk. They'd been pouring strong drink into her for hours, maybe days, ensuring that her last moments would be viewed through a merciful haze of alcohol that might, if she was lucky, blur the sharp edges of what was about to happen. On the ship, an older woman waited. The Vikings called her the Angel of Death, which is possibly the most disturbing job title in human history, and definitely not something you put on a resume unless you are applying to work for the underworld itself. This woman was the master of ceremonies for the final act, the one who would transform a living, breathing human being into a burned offering through methods that make medieval torture devices look like playground equipment. The enslaved woman was guided into the small wooden structure on the ship's deck, placed beside the corpse of her master, and then everything that could go wrong did go wrong in the most calculated way possible. Outside, the shield beating reached a crescendo. Hundreds of Vikings pounded wood against metal, creating a wall of sound designed specifically to prevent anyone from hearing what happened next. Inside the death chamber, 6 men held the woman down while the angel of death wrapped a rope around her neck. 2 men pulled in opposite directions while the old woman completed the ritual with a blade. This wasn't a quick death or a merciful one. Ibn Fadlan's account makes it clear that the killing was prolonged and brutal, executed with the kind of precision that comes only from practice, from having done this before and knowing exactly how to make it work. When it was finally over, the woman's body was arranged beside her master in a pose of eternal servitude, her purpose fulfilled, her choice honored in the most violently literal way possible. The burning came quickly after, as though the Vikings were eager to transform evidence into smoke and ash before anyone could question what they just witnessed. The closest male relative of the dead chieftain walked backward toward the ship naked, except for minimal covering, holding a lit torch in a position so awkward it would be comedic if it were, and the prelude to cremating a murder victim. He thrust the flame into the kindling, and fire consumed everything with an enthusiasm that suggested even the flames wanted this horror to end. The ship burned hot and fast, fed by oils and resins, transforming wood and flesh and bone into smoke that rose toward whatever gods the Vikings believed were watching. In their cosmology, this fire didn't destroy, but transformed, releasing spirits from earthly vessels and carrying them to Valhalla, or whatever afterlife awaited the properly sacrificed. For the enslaved woman, there would be no grave, no marker, no individual memory. Her ashes would mingle with her master's in a final, involuntary intimacy that epitomized everything about her life and death. She existed only in relation to the man who owned her, and even in death, she couldn't escape that relationship. Archaeological evidence from across the Viking world confirms that Ibn Fadlan wasn't describing some isolated incident or exaggerated traveler's tale. Excavations in Norway have uncovered graves containing decapitated individuals buried alongside their masters, bodies positioned without dignity or proper rites. Whether these deaths were sacrifices to appease hungry gods, or simply the expected fate of those unlucky enough to serve the powerful, the result was always the same. In a world where human life could be measured in silver and traded like livestock, even death belonged to someone else. The Vikings called it honor. Ibn Fadlan called it exactly what it was: murder dressed up in ceremony and justified by tradition. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, somewhere in that crowd of shield-beating Vikings, another enslaved woman was watching, learning, and perhaps already beginning to convince herself that when her master died, she too might volunteer for this honor, because sometimes the only choice available is how you die, and even that choice is really just an illusion created by people who've taken everything else.